observations. It would require mathematics, a powerful new type of mathematics that will be able to describe the bizarre properties of space itself.
When you're trying to understand the universe, it's easy to think what you do is you make lots and lots of observations, you see what's there, and then you fit it all together into your grand picture. But the problem is, unless you have some sort of idea what the picture should be, you don't know what observations to make. You don't know what's significant. And throughout the history of science, every so often someone has to come up with a new mathematical idea.
The new mathematical ideas about space were so weird, so far removed from common sense, that it would take over 2,000 years and the genius of Albert Einstein to formulate them. But when they were ready, these strange new types of mathematics would lead to a revolution in our understanding of the space that surrounds us. Okay, so what is space? We think we know the answer to this. I can talk about this room being spacious. There's a lot of space in here. Or a confined space. There's not enough volume, not enough space. But does space only exist when there's stuff in it? Does space only have a meaning when it's enclosed by walls? Think of the distance between two objects. Does that gap still exist if you take the objects away? What meaning can we give to distance if it doesn't have a start and end point? Ultimately, the question is this: does space in itself have form? Does it have structure or shape? Or is it just a place where things happen? The properties of space were first described by the mathematician Euclid over 2,000 years ago in his legendary text, The Elements. In it, he laid down a set of simple logical rules about space in what today we call Euclidean geometry.
Euclidean geometry is the geometry we see around us every day. If you're sitting in a room and it's the usual rectangular room, what you see is lots of straight lines, right angles. You see parallel lines. If you had a window, the two sides of the window are parallel. If you extended them, they'd stay exactly the same distance apart. They would never meet. And the other thing you would see if you look at geometry was that nothing else was possible.
For Euclid himself, and for almost all mathematicians for the next 2,000 years, these rules weren't just true mathematically. They were also true statements about physical reality itself. So they thought that two parallel lines would remain parallel forever, that a triangle in real space would always have angles adding up to 180 degrees. But, weird as though this might sound, it's not actually always true. Many others would refine and develop Gauss's ideas. But one of his greatest achievements will be to give us a cunning method of accurately measuring curvature. It would become known simply as the remarkable theorem. Let me explain with this globe. You see, we can see that it's three-dimensional because we can stand back and look at it. But what if you were an ant stuck on the surface? How would it know that that surface is curved? So imagine you're the ant and you start off at the North Pole, and facing south, you move down later. At the equator, you still face south and you shuffle sideways along the equator. Then you reach a certain point and then you start walking backwards, so you're still facing the same direction, and head back to the North Pole. Now look what's happened here. You've been pointing south, And yet, when you arrive back at your starting point, you're facing in a different direction. Understanding this gives us a way of calculating the curvature of a surface without ever leaving it. This was an amazing insight, but it only applies to curved surfaces, which are two-dimensional. It would take a brilliant student of Gauss's, Bernhard Riemann, to develop these ideas in a way that could be applied to the three-dimensional space that surrounds us. It would be a daring, outlandish, and to non-mathematicians absurd-sounding concept. Aged just 26, Riemann encapsulated his strange new ideas about geometry in a lecture that was to become legendary among mathematicians. In June 1854, Riemann delivered his lectures to an enraptured audience. In them, he detailed how he'd taken Gauss's ideas on curved surfaces and generalized them, so that they applied not only to curved two-dimensional surfaces, but the curvature of space in any dimension. Okay, so I'm sure this all sounds rather complicated. What exactly do we mean by curved space in any dimension? So let me try and explain. Here's the thing, Gauss talked about curved two-dimensional surfaces. Well, here we have a sheet of paper, and it's two-dimensional. So if I curve it, we can visualize and see this curvature, but only because it's embedded in 3 dimensions. Now, what if we curved 3 dimensions? Presumably, we'd need a 4th dimension. But how do you get to this 4-dimensional space? It's impossible to step outside of our 3-dimensional world. Wherever you travel in the universe, no matter how far you go, you're always stuck in 3 dimensions. The genius of Riemann was to show that you didn't need to stand in a 4th dimension to tell if space was curved. You could actually do it from the inside. But for Riemann, this would always remain a purely mathematical idea. It would take Albert Einstein to tie these mathematical ideas together and apply bendy, curved, non-Euclidean geometries to the real space that surrounds us.
I think the most important point about the whole story of non-Euclidean geometry is it shows how mathematics and the real world relate. And it starts out with mathematicians pottering around asking, could there be a geometry different from Euclid's? And if anyone came to them at the time and said, why are you studying that? They'd say, haven't got a clue. What's it useful for? No idea. It's just interesting. But they pottered around and they found a surprising answer, that different geometries were possible. And even at that point, nobody had any real applications for this idea. And then when the moment is ripe, Einstein comes along and says, that's what I need, that's real physics. And suddenly this piece of esoteric mathematics becomes vital to the scientific enterprise.
Einstein would reveal that we live not in the flat world of Euclid, but in the strange. The reason we have gravity on Earth is because the Earth is actually bending the space around it.
In Einsteinian theory of the universe, space becomes a dynamic entity that reacts to its contents. Space knows about the presence of gravitating bodies and responds to their presence by changing its geometry in really interesting ways. So what was in the 16th, 17th, 18th, 19th century a very boring, still object, suddenly in Einsteinian theory, it became